Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So Fresh Red Kills are the videos where I talk about the books that I have recently finished reading. And I actually read these in August. I read these for Q4 of Historathon. Historathon, if you don't know, is a year-long reading event where we read, discuss, and celebrate nonfiction history. And we split the year up into 4 quarters, each quarter looking at a different time period. Q3, which will be coming to an end at the end of September, looks at the years 1500 to 1820. And these books fall within that. If you're new to my channel, I don't call these reviews so much book reviews as more like book discussions. My videos are informal, they are unscripted. They're just me kind of getting out my ideas. So let's discuss these, and they're kind of odd choices. I think that there's a certain relationship between these two. They both deal, I think, with kind of a horror theme, and they both look at it in a kind of, I would say, interdisciplinary way. So let's start with this one first. We got Frankenstein, The Science of Life and Death in Frankenstein by Sharon Ruston. So this is a fairly thin academic book, and I gotta say, it's printed really nicely. This is a beautiful edition here. We get nice full color images here. Just as an example, see that there's actually quite a few images. We got some things over there in the marginal images as well. You know, there's plenty of things in here to kind of, feast your eyes upon. And it's not a very long book. I think the text itself is only around 120 pages. So you can read through this very quickly. And essentially what Sharon Ruston is doing is she's looking at the Frankenstein text and looking for, I guess you could say, evidence for the kinds of scientific knowledge or thinking that was available to Mary and Percy Shelley, because yes, Mary Shelley wrote the bulk of the novel Frankenstein, and she relies on the 1818 edition, the first one. But Percy did also make a lot of suggestions. So she looks at the original manuscripts and the annotations that Percy was making, and some of which, some of the advice Shelley took, some of it she didn't. But Percy did have a hand, at least, in the direction and the writing of Frankenstein. So what sorts of things did they know scientifically and medically? And we actually know quite a bit because they did talk about it a lot. And Percy seems to especially have written quite a bit about it in his journals, I guess letters maybe. And we know that Percy and Mary spoke about it quite a bit with each other and amongst their circle of friends. And, they sometimes even attended different medical or scientific lectures as well. So we have a pretty good idea of that. So she begins the book with sort of a recap and analysis of the Frankenstein story. Although, if you were going to read something like this, you really should read the text of Frankenstein first. I mean, she's going to assume that you're at least familiar with the text. And then she goes into some of the scientific history. And along the way, she's trying to kind of point to possible evidence that, this could reveal maybe that, Mary or Percy knew this, and this is where we find it in the text. And I will say that the first two things I talked about, the analysis of the Frankenstein text in the beginning, and then the medical history, I thought that stuff was most fascinating and most engaging. Where the book kind of would trip for me sometimes when I'm reading it is when the author felt the need to go back to the Frankenstein text to show a possible example that, this is where we can see evidence of that scientific knowledge that Mary and Percy had. And it's not always very convincing. For instance, I have this one thing marked. She discusses the discovery of the element oxygen, and then she follows it up with the passage looking at the creature inside the story making a fire and then realizing the fire can grow bigger by adding air to it, which people have been doing for thousands of years without knowing that oxygen existed. So it's some of those relations back to the text are not necessarily as convincing. But in the end, this is a pretty fast read. Like I said, I really think this edition is quite beautiful. And, it's a niche title that interests me because, yes, I'm interested in horror and horror studies, of course, Frankenstein, and I also like history, and everything from medical and scientific history is also something that I enjoy. So this kind of scratches both itches. If you were somebody who was only interested in one of those things, I think you would find this kind of read dissatisfying. So yeah, overall I did enjoy this. But what I just said about this being very niche and interdisciplinary, right? Because we got the nonfiction kind of medical and scientific history along with more of a literary analysis. We get interdisciplinary stuff in this book as well. And once again, we're talking something very niche, especially in its approach. So this is Beast, Werewolves, Serial Killers, and Man-Eaters, the Mystery of the Masters of Gevaudan. I have been learning how to read some French, but I really don't know how to pronounce it yet. Some things I do, but I'm not confident at all in how to pronounce French. So forgive me if I butchered it. And this is by Gustavo, Sanchez, Romero, and S.R. Schwalb. Now, again, this is actually kind of I like the cover design here. And this is another one which we have lots of images in here, which is pretty cool. What happened was, in the 1760s, in the French countryside, there were a series of, and I'm saying a lot, there's like more than 60. I don't remember, I'm not a numbers person who remembers numbers off the top of my head. There were definitely more than 60 victims who were mauled to death. Many of them, quite a few, more than a dozen, I think, decapitated. Mostly children and women and some men. And it seemed as though a horrible beast was roaming the countryside and just mauling and devouring people. And just, in really very horribly brutal ways. And it's still a mystery exactly what was doing it. And it seems, and they have this, they say it right in the very beginning in a kind of a note, it seems to have at least been two creatures, at least two. They have a curious way of going about this book in which, for at least part of the book, it's written as though it's one creature. And I'll explain that in a moment. But it seems like at least two creatures, and maybe even, there's even the possibility that a human, serial killer was involved in this whole thing too. You can't have, it seems, one explanation for all the different murders that happened within a few years. But it seems like a combination of things. They try to be as objective as possible, although it seems like they are, at least for one large part of the murders, they seem to be on the side of one of the culprits being like a wolf-dog hybrid that was maybe attacking people. It's difficult to say. But essentially, the way that this book is constructed, the first part of it, like the first third maybe, it's almost like it's written in a more narrative style. They just kind of recount the series of murders over a couple-year period. And sometimes it goes into almost like a historical fiction setting where we all of a sudden are seeing things from the point of view of like one of the victims or one of the witnesses. And of course, we're kind of getting like, if it's a victim especially, we don't know what they were thinking or feeling moments before they died. So we kind of go into that, and I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to figure out a way to recap. Again, it's a lot of murders. So how do you go through all those and not just have it be a laundry list of death? And I think that they do a fairly effective job, although it does come across sometimes as very pulpy. It kind of takes you out of it a little bit. There's almost like a level of camp to it sometimes. And then the rest of the book is them investigating the various possibilities. And that's, again, where we kind of get very niche, because they are trying to leave no stone unturned, but that means that they go through an exhaustive way so many possibilities. So you would have to essentially want to read not just about this beast or beasts, right, that time period. As you go through the book, you would also want to spend a lot of time on werewolf mythos, all right? And then just as much time on like the ecology of wolves, and not just present-day wolves. We're going into prehistoric wolves as well. And you're also going to talk a lot about hyenas, and you're going to talk about like tigers and jaguars and things like that. And we also got to spend some time on serial killers and lycanthropy, and so you're hitting all of these different things. And I said, it's so kind of niche that it's unlikely that a single reader, unless they are obsessed over this topic, is going to want to spend as much time on each of those things as the others. you know, so even with me, who I find this stuff interesting, you know, my patience was getting a little bit worn, where I'm like, okay, I get it. I get wolves, you know, I think wolves are interesting, but, you know, I just got done talking about, or learning about hyenas and a bunch of other things. It just gets a little bit kind of exhausting. And because of the nature, it can come off as kind of repetitive sometimes as well as it goes. But it was interesting because I didn't know a lot about this topic. I had seen, it was over 20 years ago, Brotherhood of the Wolf, the French film that came out that was kind of inspired by this whole thing. And I remember kind of liking the movie overall, but if I remember correctly, there was one character, I think he was almost like a sidekick to this investigator, and he was like this Native American martial arts expert. I just remember that really taking me out of the movie. But that was my first introduction to the whole thing. But I didn't realize, you know, the extent of the deaths, just how bad it was. Now, they did end up killing 2 different creatures. Maybe they were the things that were killing, maybe they weren't. I think that they have a record really of the first one, but the second one seems to have like been destroyed. So we don't know really much about it. And eyewitness accounts can be kind of confusing. So, you know, this book does a pretty good job. It's a popular book. Like this, you know, this is more of a work of scholarship, even though it was, you know, very thin. This is definitely a popular work, but it's exhaustive. Like I said, it's quite a bit. And it does offer a bibliography. You know, bibliography's not bad. It does have some notes, but mostly this is much more just a popular work. And yeah, like I said, people's attention, I think, will vary with this. Interesting topic. I don't know if it's the best book to read about it. I said, if you want to read the whole thing, you want to read, you know, equally about werewolves and real wolves and hyenas and jaguars and serial killers and all that stuff as well. So yeah, I still had fun with both of these books, though. You know, fascinating topics. Like I said, I happen to appreciate a lot of the various niches that these things are falling into. So they work for me, but I don't think they're going to work for everybody. So anyhow, for quarter 3 of Historathon 2024, I had read The Science of Life and Death in Frankenstein and Beast, Werewolves, Serial Killers, and Man-Eaters. So if you've read any of these, which probably haven't, but maybe some people have, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, thank you, BookTube.